The Afghan sun rose like a burning coin over Bagram Air Base, smearing the desert in gold and dust. The air was thick with the smell of diesel, gun oil, and the faint metallic tang of ammunition. Trucks rumbled down the dirt lanes, soldiers barked orders, and choppers carved the morning silence into thunder. Amid that organized chaos, Sergeant Jessica Monroe tightened the straps on her Kevlar vest and lifted another crate of 7.62 rounds onto the flatbed truck. She wasn't supposed to be here, not in this heat, not in this role. Her file said, Logistics Specialist, which was the Army's polite way of saying, Ammo Mule. She was the one who made sure the real heroes, the door kickers, the snipers, the elite, had enough firepower to keep doing what they did best. No one cheered when she walked by. No one saluted the woman who carried bullets instead of firing them. Hey, Mule! A voice called from behind. It was Corporal Davis, grinning beneath his dusty cap. You planning to carry that crate or marry it? Jess shot him a look that could cut through armor. You talk too much, Davis. Yeah, but I'm right. You treat ammo like babies. Just load 'em and go home already. She ignored him and kept stacking. Words were cheap out here. Actions, lifting, hauling, sweating. That's what counted. The desert didn't care about rank or pride. It only cared about what you could endure. By the time the truck was loaded, Jess's hands were raw and her shirt clung to her back. She wiped her face with a dirty sleeve and looked toward the far side of the base, where SEAL Team 6 was prepping for departure. They moved differently from everyone else. Quiet, efficient, lethal, even in the way they shouldered their gear. She admired them, though she'd never say it out loud. They were legends, and legends didn't look twice at ammo mules. Still, she found herself watching them more than she should. There was one in particular, Petty Officer Ryan Howell, their designated marksman. He had that calm, unshakable demeanor, like he'd seen everything and survived it twice. Unlike the others, he sometimes noticed her. Once, a few weeks back, he'd found her alone at the firing range after midnight. She was supposed to be sleeping, but she couldn't. The range was her refuge, the one place she felt like more than just the girl who carried bullets. You know, Halle had said, stepping out of the shadows, most people sleep when they're off shift. Jess hadn't flinched. Most people don't need to prove they can shoot. He had laughed softly, genuinely. Fair enough. Mind if I watch? She'd shrugged and gone back to work. Her shots were clean, each one cracking through the air with precise rhythm. She didn't miss once. When she finally set the rifle down, Halle had been watching her like a teacher studying a prodigy. Where'd you learn to shoot like that? He asked. Back home, she'd said simply. My dad was a hunter. He taught me to respect every bullet. He'd nodded. You ever think about doing more than just hauling ammo? Jess had looked down at the rifle, then at him. They won't let me. I'm not one of you. He hadn't argued, but his eyes had said everything. You should be. That was months ago. Since then, they'd shared little more than nods and small talk. But sometimes, when she passed him on the runway, she caught that same knowing look, like he saw something in her no one else did. Now, watching him and the others gear up for another classified mission, Jess felt a quiet sting in her chest. They'd go out there and face fire and fury, and she'd stay behind with her crates and her wrenches. That was her role. Safe, invisible, necessary, but forgettable. Still, she trained. Every night. Every stolen hour. She studied wind patterns, distance estimation, and breathing control. The firing range lights flickered over her determined face as she whispered to herself, slow is smooth, smooth is fast. Over and over until the words became muscle memory. She wasn't chasing glory. She was chasing purpose. Later that morning, she was summoned to the loading bay. Her commanding officer, Captain Rhodes, stood by a manifest sheet. "Monroe," he said curtly, "SEALs need an extra pair of hands on their next run. Ammo delivery to forward operating base Echo. You'll ride with them, drop the supplies, and return immediately. No deviation. Understood?" Jess blinked. "Ride with SEAL Team 6? That never happened." "Understood, sir." "Good," Rhodes said, scribbling on his clipboard. "And Monroe, stay out of their way. They don't need heroes with supply patches." She nodded, biting back her reply. When she turned, she caught Halle watching her from across the tarmac, rifle slung across his back. He gave her a faint smile that said, "Guess you're coming along for the ride." Her pulse quickened. By 1600 hours, Jess sat in the belly of a CH-47 Chinook, the rotors roaring like a hurricane above her. The vibration rattled her bones as she tightened her harness straps. Around her, the SEALs sat calm and unreadable, their faces hidden behind goggles and scarves. Halle sat directly across, checking his rifle with a precision that bordered on reverence. Jess clutched the ammo crate beside her, feeling absurdly out of place. Every man in this bird had seen combat. Every one of them had stories carved into their scars. She was the outsider, the supply sergeant tagging along because someone needed to haul the bullets. The bird lifted off, and the base fell away beneath them. The mountains stretched endlessly ahead, jagged and silent. Jess stared out the open ramp, watching the world shrink into dust and ridges. "First time flying with the team?" Hale's voice cut through the roar. She nodded. "First time this close to the fight." He smirked. "Don't worry. You'll just be watching. Easy ride." "Yeah," she said softly. "That's what they all say." Halle leaned forward slightly. "You'll be fine. You've got calm hands. Calm hands don't panic." Jess didn't know whether to feel comforted or terrified. As the flight continued, she noticed the SEALs' rituals, the way they tapped their helmets before descent, the quiet murmurs between them that weren't words but signals. They moved like a single organism, trained and precise. Jess felt like a stray nerve in a perfect body. But then the chopper started to drop lower, weaving through valleys that swallowed sunlight. The radio crackled. "Approaching Echo Ridge, 30 seconds. The pilot's tone was sharp. Jess felt her stomach lurch. She reached instinctively for the crate beside her, her one familiar thing. Halle gave her a thumbs up. "Welcome to the front line, Sergeant." They landed on a narrow strip of dust between cliffs that looked like giant teeth. The heat was suffocating. Jess followed the SEALs as they unloaded, moving fast and silent. She kept her head low, her eyes scanning the rocks. Nothing moved, but the silence was unnatural. A voice broke through the headset. "No signs of activity. Area looks clear." Jess didn't believe it. Her gut whispered otherwise, a quiet, creeping instinct she couldn't explain. She finished stacking the ammo and stepped back, wiping her forehead. The air was heavy, tense, waiting for something. Then, somewhere deep in the valley, a single echoing crack rolled through the cliffs. A sniper shot. Hale's head jerked toward the sound. Contact. The world exploded into motion. Bullets ricocheted off rocks. The ground kicked up dust around Jess's boots. Someone shouted for cover. Someone else screamed. She dropped behind a crate as the helicopter engine screamed back to life, trying to lift off before being hit. Her heart slammed against her ribs. The mission had gone sideways, fast. Through the chaos, Halle barked into his comms. "Sniper fire from the north ridge. Get eyes on." No one answered. The sniper was down, the comms scrambled, and the enemy already had the high ground. Jess crouched low, clutching her helmet, her world narrowing to the sound of her own breathing. She wasn't supposed to be here. She was just the ammo mule. But deep inside, something else began to stir. The same calm she felt behind a rifle. The same control she'd practiced night after night in secret. The line between supplier and soldier had just vanished. And for the first time in her life, Jess Monroe wasn't sure which side she belonged to anymore. The valley was quiet again, but not safe. The kind of silence that came after the first shot, when everyone was waiting for the next one. Jess pressed herself against a cracked mud wall, sand and dust clinging to her sweat-slicked skin. Her chest rose and fell like a piston. She could still taste the copper of adrenaline in her mouth. Across the open ground, Petty Officer Ryan Howley crawled into position behind a low outcrop, scanning the ridge through his scope. Multiple shooters, he hissed over the combs. North Ridge, maybe 800 meters. They've got elevation. The SEALs fanned out, moving like shadows through the broken terrain. The air vibrated with tension. Jess wanted to melt into the dirt. This wasn't supposed to happen. She was a logistics sergeant, not a combatant. The plan had been simple. Land, unload, return to base. But the plan was dead now, and so were two men. Jess, Hale's voice cut through the static. Get that ammo behind the barrier move. She scrambled up, grabbing a crate of 7. 62 rounds. Bullets snapped past her head, close enough that she could feel the air they displaced. She ran anyway, boots slipping on loose gravel, heart hammering so loud it drowned the gunfire. She dove behind a Humvee, where 3 SEALs were setting up a defensive perimeter. Who the hell's she? One barked. Support, Hawley shot back. Right now, she's whoever carries bullets. Load up. Jess did as ordered, tearing open crates, sliding belts into machine guns, her hands moving faster than her thoughts. Shells clinked around her feet. The smell of cordite filled her lungs. She delivered ammo before, thousands of times, but never like this. Never while the world was coming apart. Another explosion rocked the valley. The ridge erupted with muzzle flashes. The Taliban had them boxed in, using high ground and overlapping fire lanes. Their convoy was shredded metal now, their exit route blocked. Where's our overwatch? Hawley shouted into the mic. No response. Then softer. Damn it. He looked toward the far side of the ridge, where their sniper should have been. Jess followed his gaze and saw him lying motionless in the dust, half hidden behind shattered rocks. His rifle gleamed in the sun, abandoned. Hale's jaw clenched. Snipers down. For a moment, time froze. Jess felt something twist in her stomach. That rifle, she'd seen it in Hale's hands at the range before, seen how reverently he treated it. It wasn't just a weapon. It was their lifeline. And now it was useless. We've got no eyes on the ridge, one of the SEALs said. We can't move. Hale's voice cracked like thunder. We move or we die. He turned toward Jess, his tone shifting. Stay down, Monroe. Do not engage. You hear me? She nodded automatically, but her mind was already somewhere else. The enemy had the ridge. Their marksman was gone. The team was blind. Every instinct screamed for her to hide, but another voice whispered deeper inside her, cold and steady. You've trained for this. You know what to do. She peeked over the edge of the Humvee. Through the haze, she could see faint flashes from the Ridge 3 positions, staggered along the slope. She could estimate distance, maybe wind direction. Her breathing slowed without her permission, like muscle memory taking command. Hawley shouted orders. Men fired and moved in bursts. But the enemy fire didn't let up. It was surgical, precise sniper fire controlling the kill zone. Jess looked back at the fallen marksman. The rifle lay just 20 yards away, half buried in sand. Between here and there was open ground, death territory. But without that rifle, they were sitting ducks. Stay put, she told herself. You're not trained for this. Another bullet pinged off the Humvee's side mirror. Holly ducked. The gunner screamed for more ammo. Jess's decision made itself. She bolted from cover. Monroe, no. Hale's voice echoed behind her. She ran low, zigzagging through the dust, every nerve on fire. Bullets chased her shadow, kicking up dirt at her heels. She dropped behind a rock, reached out, grabbed the rifle by its sling, and dragged it back toward the Humvee. When she finally dove behind cover again, her lungs burned, but the rifle felt right in her hands. Familiar, heavy with purpose. Holly stared at her like she'd lost her mind. You trying to get yourself killed? Somebody needs to shoot back, she said, already checking the chamber. You said the sniper's down. He opened his mouth to argue, but stopped when he saw how she handled the weapon quick, confident, every movement deliberate. He blinked once, and nodded grimly. You ever done this for real? She shook her head. Only in training, at night, when nobody was watching. Holly took a deep breath, eyes scanning the ridge. Then it's time for the real thing. He pointed. See that cluster of rocks just below the crest? That's their spotter. Take him first. 2 clicks left wind, range about 800. Jess adjusted the scope, lined up her sight. Her hands stopped shaking. Her breath slowed. For a second, the chaos disappeared. It was just her, the rifle, and the target. She squeezed the trigger. The rifle kicked against her shoulder. Through the scope, she saw the spotter's silhouette drop. One clean hit. Jesus, Holly muttered. That's one. Adrenaline surged, but she didn't smile. There was no time. She shifted to the second flash of light on the ridge, another enemy shooter resetting his aim. Another breath, another pull. Second target down. Keep going, Holly barked. She did. Every shot was a rhythm. Inhale, exhale, squeeze. The rifle became part of her heartbeat. Around them, the SEALs started to push forward again, emboldened by her precision. The enemy fire slowed, faltered, then faded as the shooters fell silent one by one. When the last rifle went quiet, the valley seemed to exhale. For a few seconds, no one spoke. Then Holly turned to her, his voice low. Remind me never to underestimate logistics again. Jess lowered the rifle, her arms trembling from the weight of what she'd just done. She wasn't proud. She was alive. That was enough. But survival was temporary here. Stay sharp, Holly said. That wasn't all of them. He was right. Even as he spoke, a fresh burst of gunfire erupted from the southern ridge. The enemy was regrouping, circling like wolves. Their extraction bird was still 30 minutes out. The SEALs had wounded men, and half their ammo gone. Holly handed her a radio. You're on overwatch now. If they pop up again, you drop them. Jess stared at him. You're serious? You earned the rifle, he said simply. We'll handle the ground. You cover us. She swallowed hard, slid into position on the back of the Humvee, and set up the bipod. The mountains stretched before her, vast, merciless. Every shadow could hide death. Her pulse slowed again. Her mind cleared. For the first time, she wasn't just hauling bullets for others. She was the one holding the line. Below her, the SEALs moved like ghosts, shifting position, dragging their wounded, firing short, controlled bursts. Holly checked in every few seconds, his tone calm, grounding. Left ridge movement, top rock. See it? She did. Another shot, another hit. Minutes blurred into hours. By the time the sun started to dip behind the ridges, smoke curled from the burned-out vehicles, and the air stank of cordite and blood. Jess's shoulder ached, her eyes burned from sand and sweat. But the team was still alive. She had no idea what command would say, if they'd call her reckless or insubordinate. It didn't matter. Out here, There was no rank, no gender, no protocol. There was only survival. When Hale crawled up beside her again, dirt streaking his face, he gave her a long look. "You did good, Monroe." She didn't answer. She just looked through the scope again, scanning the ridge for more threats. He smiled faintly. "You're one of us now, you know that?" Jess exhaled, eyes never leaving the horizon. "Maybe," she said quietly. "Or maybe I'd just been one all along and nobody noticed." The radio crackled then. "Extraction in 10. Be ready." 10 minutes. 10 more minutes between them and home. She checked her rifle, chambered a round, and whispered to herself, "Let's finish this." The next wave was already coming. The sun had started its slow descent, bleeding orange light across the jagged Afghan ridges. Smoke from the earlier firefight still hung over the valley like a shroud. For a fleeting moment, it seemed the chaos had passed. The gunfire had gone. Silent, replaced only by the wind whispering through the canyons. Jess Monroe crouched beside a Humvee, her rifle resting across her knees, breath still coming in shallow bursts. Her hands trembled not from fear now, but from the aftershock of adrenaline leaving her system. Around her, the SEALs moved quietly, checking weapons, counting remaining rounds, tending to the wounded. Petty Officer Ryan Howell crouched nearby, his shoulder wrapped in a makeshift bandage where shrapnel had grazed him. "How's the armory looking?" he asked, voice tight. Jess exhaled. "We're down to 6 full mags, 3 partials. Maybe enough for one more fight." Hale nodded grimly. "One more fight is exactly what we're getting." Before she could respond, the radio crackled with static. A voice came through barely audible. "Eagle 1, this is Raven copy?" Hale snatched it up. "Raven, this is Eagle 1. We're pinned in Echo Ridge, need immediate extraction. Hostiles regrouping South Ridge. How copy?" Silence. Then, faintly, "Copy ET a 25 mics. Hold position. 25 minutes. Might as well have been 25 years. Hale's jaw tightened. "They'll hit us again before that bird's here." He scanned the ridge through his binoculars. Jess followed his gaze. The southern slope was dark, an uneven perfect cover for insurgents creeping closer. She could feel it, the weight of coming danger pressing on the air like a gathering storm. She adjusted her scope, eyes tracing every rock and shadow. Her heart thudded, slow and steady. She was learning to feel the rhythm of the battlefield, the waiting, the anticipation before the next eruption. Then she saw a flicker of movement, a glint of metal near the ridge line. Her voice came out low, calm. "Contact, South Ridge. 200 meters, maybe more." Hale shifted beside her. "Take it." She didn't hesitate. The rifle barked, echoing off the canyon walls. A figure dropped instantly. But before she could adjust for another, the world exploded. A burst of gunfire erupted from the opposite slope, tearing into their position. Bullets clanged off metal, chewing through the dirt walls. The SEALs scattered for cover. Someone shouted, "We're flanked." Jess hit the ground, pulling her rifle in tight. The ambush wasn't over, was just beginning. They'd been drawn into a trap. East Ridge, multiple shooters. Hale shouted, returning fire. Rounds ripped through the Humvee's windows, showering Jess with glass. She ducked behind the engine block, the closest thing to cover she had left. Dust filled her mouth. Every breath burned. She risked a glance over the hood and froze. A dozen figures were closing in from the eastern ridge, firing in bursts, using the setting sun to mask their advance. They moved fast, disciplined, too disciplined. These weren't local militia. These were trained insurgents. Hale's voice came sharp. "We've got to fall back to the ridge. Go, go, go." The SEALs moved in pairs, covering one another as they retreated toward higher ground. Jess grabbed her pack and rifle, sprinting after them, bullets chewing the dirt at her heels. She dove behind a line of rocks, chest heaving. Have slid in beside her. You still got eyes on them? Jess peered through her scope. The enemy was spreading out, tightening the noose. They're closing fast. We can't outrun them. Then we don't, Halle said. We hold them here. He tossed her 2 spare mags. Make 'em count. The world narrowed again, just like before. Jess steadied the rifle, adjusted her scope for distance and wind. The air was thick with smoke, heat, and noise. But inside the scope, everything was still. One target at a time. She fired. Another body dropped. Again and again. Each shot was clean, measured, deliberate. The rifle kicked, her shoulder bruising with every recoil. But she didn't care. She was in the zone, heart and weapon moving in sync. The SEALs around her fought like machines, short bursts, shifting positions, never wasting a round. Halle barked orders between shots, his calm voice cutting through the storm. 3 o'clock. Behind the boulder. Jess swung her rifle, spotted the muzzle flash, fired. The enemy slumped forward, rifle slipping from his grasp. Nice shot, Halle muttered. But even as they fought, the insurgents kept advancing. Mortar shells began to fall, exploding closer each time. The ground trembled. The air filled with dust and shrapnel. Jess flinched as a blast knocked her sideways. Her ears rang. For a few disoriented seconds, the world went muffled, just a distant underwater hum. Then a hand grabbed her arm. Halle, you good? She nodded, though her head throbbed. Her helmet had saved her. Barely. Keep firing, he said. They're trying to box us in. She crawled back into position, reloaded, and sighted in on a new wave of fighters cresting the ridge. There were too many. Where's our damn air support? One of the SEALs shouted. Still 20 minutes out, Halle barked. 20 minutes. They'd never last that long. Jess bit her lip, focused on her breathing, and squeezed off another round. She'd stopped thinking about rank, about permission, about what she was allowed to do. None of it mattered. Out here, she was whoever she had to be to keep them alive. Another shot. Another hit. But her hands were shaking now, the adrenaline starting to turn into exhaustion. Her shoulders screamed from the constant recoil. The air was filled with gunfire, shouted commands, the deafening thump of mortar. Through it all, she heard Hale's voice steady, grounding. Stay with me, Monroe. We're not dying today. She found strength in that voice. The next time she pulled the trigger, it felt like her father's voice echoed behind it, the man who'd taught her to respect every bullet, every breath, every decision. Easy, she whispered to herself. One shot, one life. The scope flashed. The target dropped. Minutes passed like hours. The enemy's fire slowed again, replaced by shouting and movement on the ridges. Halle glanced up, breathing hard. They're pulling back, Jess blinked. You sure? For now. He collapsed against the rocks, sweat streaking his face. You bought us time. Jess lowered her rifle, muscles quivering. Her heart pounded, her ears still rang, but somehow they were still alive. The SEALs regrouped, dragging the wounded behind cover, checking ammo. The radio crackled weakly Raven's voice again. Eagle 1, extraction en route. 10 minutes. Halle exhaled. 10 minutes, we can make that. Jess looked out at the smoking valley, the twisted wreckage of what had been their convoy. The ridge where she'd killed 3 men in 10 seconds. The silence that always followed chaos. She didn't feel like a hero. She didn't even feel human. Just empty. Halle noticed her stare. Don't, he said quietly. Don't look too long. You start counting faces. It'll eat you alive. She swallowed hard and nodded. You do this every day? He gave a small, humorless smile. You get used to surviving, never to killing. The helicopter sound grew louder, a distant thrum building into a roar. The extraction bird. All right, Halle shouted. Let's move. Grab the wounded. Go, go, go. Jess slung her rifle, grabbed a fallen seal by the vest, and helped haul him toward the landing zone. The downwash from the chopper blasted dust into her eyes, the rotors screaming above. As they loaded the last man, Halle turned to her. You get in first. She shook her head. You're hit worse than I am. Orders, Sergeant. She hesitated, then climbed aboard, gripping the doorframe as the helicopter lifted. Below her, the battlefield shrank into smoke and shadow. Halle climbed in last, collapsing beside her. His voice was barely audible over the roar. You did good, Monroe. You saved us out there. Jess didn't answer. She just stared at the fading ridges, her fingers still curled around the rifle's grip. She wasn't supposed to be a soldier. She wasn't supposed to be anything but an ammo mule. But somewhere in that valley, amid the fire and death, she'd crossed a line she could never uncross. And whether the world ever knew it or not, she had become something far more dangerous, a marksman with nothing left to prove. The helicopter blades screamed above as it cut through the dusty Afghan night, slicing a path through smoke and wind. Jess Monroe sat pressed against the steel wall, her helmet tilted down, rifle across her knees. The vibrations rattled through her body, but she felt nothing. Numbness had taken over, cold and absolute. Opposite her, Halle leaned back, eyes half closed, blood soaking through the bandage on his shoulder. Two medics worked quietly beside him, shouting orders over the roar. Around them, the rest of SEAL Team 6 sat battered, bruised, silent, a rare quiet from men who had just survived hell. Jess stared at her hands. They were still trembling, blackened with soot and blood. She had never fired so much, so fast, for so long. Every trigger pull came back to her in flashes. The recoil, the screams, the targets dropping in her scope. The memory hit her like a wave. She wasn't trained for this. She was just an ammo mule, a logistics sergeant. She was supposed to carry bullets, not end lives. When the chopper finally touched down at the forward base, she followed the others off, boots sinking into the dusty tarmac. Floodlights cut through the darkness, illuminating the chaos. Medics rushing stretchers, mechanics swarming damaged vehicles, officers shouting coordinates. Monroe! Hale's voice called out. She turned. He was still limping, but standing, his face a pale mask of grit and exhaustion. You did good today, he said, stepping closer. Don't forget that. Jess didn't reply. She just nodded stiffly. Halle studied her for a moment, then lowered his voice. They'll debrief us tomorrow. For now, get cleaned up. Sleep, if you can. She tried to smile, but her lips barely moved. Yeah, sure. He gave her a brief pat on the shoulder, then limped toward the med tent. Jess stood there for a long moment, the noise of the bass fading into a dull hum. Finally, she walked away, rifle still in hand, toward her barracks. The shower water ran brown with dirt and blood. Jess stood under it, motionless, watching the filth swirl down the drain. Her reflection in the mirror afterward didn't look like her. Her face was harder, her eyes distant, older somehow. She sat on the edge of her bunk, towel around her shoulders, when the door creaked open. It was Lieutenant Daniels, her commanding officer, a tall, square-jawed man whose uniform was always immaculate. Monroe, he said flatly. Debrief in 10. Command tent. She blinked. Sir, I thought, I know. It's early, but command wants details now. You're the only one with visual confirmation on the ridge. She swallowed. Yes, sir. The tent smelled of coffee, sand, and tension. Around a folding table sat 3 officers and Howe, his arm in a sling. Maps were spread out across the surface, dotted with red markers. Jess entered, saluted, and stood stiffly. "At ease," Danielle said. "Sit." She obeyed, folding her hands in her lap. Major Kearns, a gray-haired man with eyes like steel, leaned forward. "Sergeant Monroe, we've reviewed the drone footage. You engaged 7 confirmed hostiles on Echo Ridge after Petty Officer Hawley was injured. That correct?" Jess hesitated. "Yes, sir. And before that, you were resupplying ammunition." "Yes, sir. I was assigned to the resupply convoy." Kearns exchanged a glance with the others. "So you weren't designated a marksman. Yet you picked up the sniper rifle and started eliminating targets with precision shots at over 200 meters. Jess's throat tightened. "It was that or die, sir." "They were closing in. Someone had to cover the flank." "Someone did," Kearns said, almost grudgingly. "And you did it well." Daniels leaned back, studying her. "We've seen this before. Someone breaks the mold when things go bad. But you didn't just survive, Monroe. You took control." Jess's voice came out small. "I just did what I had to do." Hawley spoke up then, his voice quiet but firm. "She didn't just help, sir. She saved us. Every man here owes her his life." The tent went silent for a beat. The major scribbled something on his notepad. Finally, he said, "Effective immediately, Sergeant Monroe, you'll be reassigned to advanced marksmanship training. You'll shadow Hale's team for future Overwatch operations." Jess blinked. "Sir, you've got instincts," Kearns said simply. "We'd be idiots not to use them." She opened her mouth to protest, but Hawley shot her a look. Not harsh, just understanding. She closed it again. "Yes, sir," she said finally. Training came fast. Within days, Jess was on the range from dawn to dusk, learning the art of precision. Not just shooting, but reading wind, adjusting for elevation, controlling breath and heart rate. Hawley watched her through binoculars as she lay prone, a rifle steady in her grip. "Breath," he said. "In through the nose. Hold. Let the heartbeat settle. Then exhale as you squeeze." She followed the rhythm. The shot cracked, and the target, a steel silhouette at 800 meters, rang with a satisfying ping. Hawley grinned. "That's it. Sniper's breath." She smiled faintly, the first genuine one in days. "You ever miss?" she asked. "Sure," he said, "but only once, weeks past." Jess's precision grew sharper, her confidence steadier. Yet at night, when she lay in her bunk, the ghosts of Echo Ridge came back. The faces, the screams, the moment she pulled the trigger and saw a life end through glass. She started keeping a notebook, not of kills, but of lessons. Notes about wind patterns, distances, and emotional control. On the last page, she wrote, "Breathe, don't think. Just survive." One night, Hawley found her sitting outside the tents, staring at the horizon. "Can't sleep?" he asked, sitting beside her. "Not much lately," she said. "Feels like the shots never stop echoing." He nodded slowly. "They don't, not really. You just learn to live with the noise." She looked at him, searching his face. "How do you do it?" "Keep going," he smiled faintly. "Because someone has to protect the ones who can't." Jess looked back at the desert, where the stars bled through the endless black. For the first time since the ambush, she felt a strange calm settle over her. Maybe it wasn't about killing. Maybe it was about saving lives, one breath, one shot at a time. 2 weeks later, the radio crackled again. A new mission. Target zone, Southern Valley. Possible insurgent cache. High risk of contact. Jess and Hawley exchanged a look. This time, she didn't hesitate. "Let's move," she said. She wasn't the same soldier who had carried ammo boxes and doubted her place. That woman had died on Echo Ridge. What remained was something forged in fire, a sniper with purpose. As they loaded up for the op, Holly handed her the rifle case. You name her yet? Jess blinked. Name her? Every sniper names their rifle. Makes it personal. She thought for a moment, then said softly, Phoenix. Holly grinned. Fitting. The engines roared to life, and the night swallowed them once more. Jess closed her eyes, feeling the hum of the helicopter through her bones. This time, the fear was gone. Only focus remained. Because she wasn't just an ammo mule anymore. She was the eye in the storm. The breath before the bullet. The ghost they never saw coming. The roar of the helicopter faded into the distance, leaving only silence and the hum of the desert wind. Jess Monroe adjusted her scope, her body pressed flat against the ridge's rocky surface. The night was still eerily still. Below, the southern valley stretched out in muted grays and shifting shadows. Through the lens, she could see the faint outline of a small compound tucked between dry riverbeds. A single lantern flickered outside the largest structure. To the untrained eye, it looked like another nameless Afghan village. But to SEAL Team 6, it was something else entirely. A suspected weapons depot used by one of the region's most elusive insurgent commanders. Eyes on? Hale's voice whispered over the comms. Jess adjusted her focus. Visual confirmed. 2 armed guards outside the main door. No heat signatures in the towers. Could be more inside. Copy that, Holly said. We move on your mark. She scanned the compound again, watching for patterns. The guards were relaxed, pacing slowly, rifles slung carelessly. They weren't expecting an attack, at least not tonight. She exhaled softly. Go. Below her, shadows detached from the earth. The SEALs, moving like ghosts through the sand. Their formation was tight, silent, perfect. Jess tracked them through the scope, her finger resting lightly on the trigger guard. Hale's voice came through again, calm and steady. Ridge Overwatch is yours, Phoenix. Phoenix. The Cody name had stuck faster than she'd expected. At first, it embarrassed her. It sounded too grand, too symbolic. But somewhere deep down, she'd come to accept it. Maybe she needed a name that wasn't haunted by the past. Her crosshairs followed the team as they reached the first wall. The guards were still unaware. Jess steadied her breathing. She could hear her own heartbeat, slow and deliberate. Then one of the guards turned, too early, too sharp. His eyes caught the faint glint of a helmet under moonlight. He started to raise his weapon. Engage, Hale's voice snapped. Jess didn't think. The rifle cracked, a thunderclap swallowed by the canyon. The guard dropped instantly. The second turned in confusion, reaching for his rifle. Another shot, another flash, another fall. 2 down, Jess said quietly. Clean, Holly replied. Moving in. She watched as the team breached the outer wall, slipping into the compound like shadows through smoke. Minutes crawled by. The sound of distant movement echoed faintly in her headset. Short bursts of suppressed gunfire, coded signals, the quiet rhythm of trained soldiers at work. Then suddenly, chaos. Contact. South building. Hale's voice barked. Multiple tangos. Through her scope, Jess saw figures spilling from the rear of the compound, rifles flashing. The SEALs dove for cover, returning fire. Ridge, I need cover fire. Holly shouted. Jess adjusted instantly, shifting to the new angle. Targets appeared like ghosts in her glass. She lined up the first, fired. 1 down. Shifted. Fired again. Another. She lost count after the 5th. Her breathing was mechanical now, her body moving with precision and rhythm. She didn't feel fear anymore. Just focus. Phoenix, we're pinned. Hale's voice came through again, strained. Sniper Tower East corner. Jess swung the scope. There, a faint muzzle flash in the tower's dark slit. She exhaled, finger tightening on the trigger. The tower window erupted in dust and splinters. Silence. Tower clear, she said, voice flat. Copy that, Hale breathed. Moving. The firefight stretched on for minutes that felt like hours. Jess reloaded twice. Every bullet counted, every decision critical. The team pushed forward, room by room, until the radio finally crackled again. Compound secure, Hale reported. Target cache located. We've got intel hard drives, weapons manifests. Looks like this was one of their major routes. Jess leaned back, exhaling a long breath she hadn't realized she'd been holding. But then, Hale's voice came again, lower this time. Phoenix? We've got a problem. Her pulse quickened. Talk to me. There was a pause. Then, civilians. 2 of them. Looks like hostages. One's a kid? Jess's stomach twisted. Civilians weren't supposed to be here. Not in a depot like this. Extraction ETA 15 mics, came the command over the main channel. Secure the site and hold position. Roger that, Hale said, then switched back to private comms. Phoenix, keep your eyes open. If they regroup, we're sitting ducks. Jess nodded, scanning the ridges again. Her scope swept across every shadow, every flicker of movement. Minutes passed. Too quiet. Then she saw it. 3 figures moving fast along the far ridge, just outside her thermal range. No insignias, no uniforms. But they moved like trained fighters, using cover, closing in. Hale, you've got movement north ridge, 3 contacts, she said sharply. Looks like they're circling for a flank. Copy. Can you take him? Affirmative. She zeroed in on the lead man. He was crouched low, rifle ready, scanning ahead. The wind shifted slightly, pushing dust across her line of sight. She adjusted for drift, heartbeat steady. Exhale. Squeeze. The round hit clean. The man dropped. The other 2 froze, scanning wildly. She fired again. Second target fell backward, motionless. The 3rd dove behind a rock. Smart. Jess waited. The seconds dragged. Then, a flicker of movement. Just enough. She fired. Silence. Ridge clear, she said softly. Copy that. You just saved our backs again, Hale replied. By the time the helicopter arrived, the compound was burning. The team loaded the intel, weapons crates, and the 2 hostages, a terrified woman and a boy no older than 10. As the bird lifted off, Jess caught one last look at the valley below, a sea of shadows and flame. It looked almost peaceful from above, the chaos reduced to distant orange flickers. Hale sat beside her, helmet off, staring at the boy. Didn't expect that, he said quietly. Jess shook her head. War never asks what we expect. He looked at her then, really looked. You're getting good at this. She gave a small, tired laugh. Good isn't the word I'd use. Maybe not, he said. But you've got the one thing that matters. Control. Control. The word echoed in her head long after they touched down at base. The next morning, she found herself standing on the range again, the sunrise painting the desert gold. Her rifle rested in front of her, cleaned and gleaming. She sighted a target at 1,000 meters, the furthest mark yet. As she breathed in, she remembered her first day, the fear, the noise, the shaking hands. That version of her felt like a different person. She exhaled and squeezed the trigger. The steel plate clanged. Dead center. Hale's voice behind her. Told you. You're a natural. She turned slightly, smiling faintly. Or maybe I just stopped doubting myself. He nodded. That's the same thing. That evening, Command held a closed briefing. The data from the raid had confirmed what they feared. The insurgents weren't just stockpiling weapons. They were planning a large-scale offensive across multiple provinces. Holly was assigned to lead the recon unit for the next phase. And this time, Jess wasn't being asked to tag along. She was being requested by name. Phoenix, the mission file read. Primary Overwatch Sniper. As she closed the folder, Jess felt a strange calm settle over her. For the first time, she wasn't running from what she'd become. She understood it now, the quiet weight of responsibility that came with the trigger. War didn't make heroes. It made survivors. And survivors made choices. That night, as she lay in her bunk, the sound of distant gunfire echoed faintly through the desert. She stared at the ceiling, whispering to herself, one shot, one breath, one more day. The night hung over the Afghan mountains like a curse, moonless, windless, and tense enough to make every sound feel like a threat. Samantha crouched behind a ridge, her gloved hands gripping the sniper rifle tighter than ever before. The SEALs had pushed deep into enemy territory, but the radio static was bad, too bad. The enemy had begun jamming their signal. That meant they were being hunted. Captain Rhodes motioned silently with 2 fingers, pointing toward a narrow valley below. Through her scope, Samantha saw the faint orange flickers of campfires. There were dozens of them. Insurgents armed, organized, and waiting. The realization hit her like a cold slap. They weren't hunting the enemy anymore. They'd walked straight into a trap. Ammo Mule, Rhodes whispered, his tone clipped. Your highs tonight. We move when you say it's clear. She nodded, her heart hammering so loud she worried it might betray their position. For years she had carried boxes of bullets, patched up the wounded, and followed orders. Now, every decision rested on her finger, resting near the trigger. She scanned the valley through the scope again. Movement 2 men on a ridge opposite theirs, positioning a heavy machine gun. Without hesitation, she exhaled slowly and fired. The rifle cracked through the silence. One target fell instantly. The other ducked, returning fire wildly. The SEALs scattered to cover. Tracers zipped through the darkness like angry comets. Contact. Rhodes barked. We're compromised. Samantha reloaded and swung her rifle toward the muzzle flashes. Years of watching the snipers work had carved something sharp inside her, a rhythm, a precision. She squeezed off 2 more shots, and both found their mark. The firing from below faltered. But the quiet didn't last. Within seconds, mortar started to fall. The ground shook, dirt and smoke choking the air. Samantha's ears rang as explosions rolled up the valley. She ducked beside a boulder, heart pounding, the acrid smell of gunpowder thick around her. Rhodes crawled to her position, shouting over the chaos. We've got wounded. Can you get us an exit path? She turned her scope toward the far ridgeline north, looked open, but it was a gamble. If we move through that pass, we can reach the river. It's risky, but it's all we've got. Rhodes gave her a hard look, then nodded. Then we move on your call, sniper. The word hit her like a shock. Sniper. For the first time, it wasn't mockery or a joke. It was command. It was trust. They began retreating under her cover fire. She picked targets one by one, forcing the insurgents to stay low. Every bullet counted. Every second mattered. Her body screamed with exhaustion. Her lungs burned from the smoke, but she refused to stop. The SEALs carried their wounded, moving slow and heavy. When one of the team stumbled, Samantha rushed forward, throwing his arm over her shoulder. You're not dying here, she hissed. Together they stumbled toward the riverbed, bullets snapping through the air like angry insects. By the time they reached the water, dawn was bleeding into the sky. The mountains glowed faintly in the cold light. Behind them, enemy shouts echoed across the valley. They were still being chased. Samantha dropped to a knee, scanning the ridge. She spotted a group of insurgents setting up an RPG launcher. Without thinking, she lay prone, adjusted her scope, and took the shot. The explosion that followed tore through the enemy position, scattering bodies and debris. The SEALs cheered weakly, their relief brief but real. Then, over the radio static broke. Extraction en route. ETA 10 minutes. 10 minutes felt like forever. They dug in along the riverbank, laying suppressive fire while waiting for the bird. Rhodes crouched beside her. "You saved our asses back there," he said, voice rough. "Remind me to never underestimate an ammo mule again." She gave a faint grin, though her hands trembled. "I'm not carrying ammo anymore, Captain. I'm using it." The sound of rotor blades finally filled the air, a black hawk cutting through the morning haze. The team waved signal flares as it descended. Dust swirled, blinding them for a moment. As the helicopter touched down, the door gunner opened fire toward the ridge, keeping the enemy pinned. Samantha helped the wounded aboard before climbing in last. As the chopper lifted off, she looked back at the valley, a battlefield of smoke, blood, and silence. For the first time, she didn't feel like a shadow. She felt seen. But even as relief washed over the team, Samantha noticed something that made her stomach drop. A flash of light from the mountain peak. Through the haze, she recognized the reflection of a sniper scope aimed directly at their aircraft. She didn't think. She acted. Slinging her rifle against the chopper frame, she braced her body and sighted the scope. The helicopter bucked in the air, throwing off her aim. She exhaled, steadied herself, and fired. The bullet cut through the chaos, and a second later, the glint vanished. The threat was gone. The pilot shouted, "Good shot, whoever that was." Rhodes looked at her with disbelief and admiration. "Guess we found our new Overwatch." As the chopper roared toward base, Samantha leaned her head back, exhaustion overtaking her. The adrenaline drained away, leaving her with nothing but trembling hands and a heart full of realization. She had crossed a line that separated the followers from the protectors, the load-bearers from the defenders. And she knew there was no going back. When they landed at the forward base, medics rushed the wounded inside. Rhodes stopped her before she could disappear. "Command's gonna want a full report," he said. "But before they hear it, thank you, Samantha. You didn't just save a team tonight. You earned a name." She looked at him, unsure whether to smile or cry. "A name?" He nodded. "Shadowhawk. That's what we'll call you now." The name felt strange, but right. It wasn't the name of an ammo mule. It was the name of a soldier who had found her purpose in the middle of chaos. That night, as she sat alone by the fire, cleaning her rifle, she thought of the faces of those she'd saved and those she couldn't. The mountains loomed dark and quiet, but her heart was louder than fear. She wasn't just part of the mission anymore. She was the mission. The debrief room was cold, silent, and smelled faintly of antiseptic and dust. Samantha sat at the long metal table, her hands folded tight, her face pale beneath the flickering fluorescent light. Across from her sat two officers from Naval Intelligence 1, a man with a clipboard and the kind of expression that never changed. The other, a woman whose calm eyes gave away nothing. It had been 72 hours since the rescue. The news of what happened in the valley had already spread through the base like wildfire. Ammo Mule turned sniper, save SEAL Team 6. It sounded heroic when whispered in the mess hall. But here, under the unblinking light, it was just a complication, a question mark in a system that didn't know what to do with her. "Specialist Parker," the officer with the clipboard said, his tone clipped, bureaucratic. "You disobeyed direct orders to maintain support position. You engaged enemy targets without authorization. You fired from a moving helicopter using a sniper rifle that wasn't assigned to your role. Do you understand the severity of that? Samantha met his gaze. Sir, if I hadn't, we'd all be dead. The woman beside him leaned forward. That's not the point. You stepped outside your chain of command. Rhodes, sitting to her left, cut in before Samantha could answer. With all due respect, she saved her chain of command. You weren't there. She had clearer eyes than any of us that night. The man with the clipboard sighed, unimpressed. Captain Rhodes, you know how this goes. Heroic or not, her actions need review. Protocol exists for a reason. Samantha said nothing. Inside, she felt a familiar chill, the same one she'd felt before her first mission, before her first kill. She wasn't afraid for herself. She was afraid of what would happen if they buried the truth under paperwork. After the debrief, she was confined to quarters, pending further evaluation. They took her rifle, her field access, her privileges. The room felt smaller than ever, four gray walls, and the weight of uncertainty pressing down on her chest. Rhodes stopped by that night, bringing 2 cups of coffee and a look that hovered between pride and guilt. They'll review everything, he said. You'll get cleared eventually. Hell, I'll testify myself. You're too good to lose over politics. She stared at the steam curling from her cup. I didn't ask to be a hero, sir. I just didn't want anyone else to die. He nodded, quiet for a moment. That's exactly why they'll never understand you. The system's built to follow rules, not instincts. You followed your gut, and that scares them. The next morning, she was summoned again, this time not to the debriefing room, but to the command tent. A tall man in a clean uniform stood by the map table, his posture as rigid as the medals on his chest. General McAllister. He was known for running covert ops across half the world, and for never wasting words. Parker, he began, his voice gravelly. You're in a mess, but a useful mess. Samantha frowned slightly. Sir? He gestured to a tablet on the table. On the screen was drone footage, grainy but clear. Her, in the valley, taking the shots that saved the SEALs. Then the helicopter sequence, where she neutralized the sniper mid-flight. McAllister tapped the screen. This footage is making rounds back home. The brass is divided. Half think you're reckless. Half think you're a miracle. I think you're both. Which makes you interesting. He turned to her. There's a covert op leaving in 5 days. No names, no official record. It's a long-range recon mission, and they need someone who can shoot and keep quiet. You in? Samantha hesitated. Sir, I'm still under investigation. He smirked. Investigations take time. Missions don't wait. I can make the paperwork disappear for now. The offer felt like a trap and a lifeline all at once. She could feel the old version of herself, the quiet logistics soldier begging her to say no. But another part of her, the one forged in that valley under fire, whispered something different. You were born for this. I'm in, she said finally. McAllister nodded once. Good, you leave at dawn. Pack light. The new unit was unlike any she'd worked with before. No insignias, no formal greetings, no names. Just code names and silence. There were 5 of them in total, each dangerous in their own way. They called her Shadowhawk. No, the name Rhodes had given her. It stuck. Their mission: infiltrate a remote mountain compound suspected of housing an enemy commander linked to the ambush that nearly killed SEAL Team 6. It wasn't about revenge, not officially, but for Samantha. It felt personal. As they flew low over the desert in a stealth transport, the leader, a grizzled operative known only as Rook, sat beside her, checking his weapon. You the one from the valley? He asked without looking up. She nodded. He gave a faint chuckle. Didn't think they'd send a legend. I'm not a legend, she said quietly. Just lucky. He looked at her then, his eyes dark and steady. No one gets lucky that many times. They dropped at twilight, parachuting into the barren landscape below. The mission was ghost silent, no comms, no noise, no backup. Just the whisper of wind against sand. As they trekked toward the mountains, Samantha felt the old rhythm return, the heartbeat syncing with the environment, every sound and shadow speaking to her like an old language. By midnight, they had eyes on the compound. Dozens of guards patrolled the perimeter, weapons slung loose, unaware of the storm coming their way. Samantha set up on a high ridge, her rifle resting on a rock, her scope aligned perfectly with the enemy sentry line. Rook's voice came through the encrypted channel. "Shadowhawk, you're clear to engage." The shot came easy, clean, silent, surgical. One guard fell, then another. The team moved in, ghost-like, sweeping through the compound. It was over in less than 10 minutes. Efficient, controlled. But then, as they cleared the last building, a hidden door swung open, and a small group of fighters unleashed chaos. Explosions ripped through the compound. Samantha was thrown against a wall, ears ringing, vision blurring. She scrambled to her knees, rifle clutched tight, eyes scanning through smoke and flames. Rook's voice crackled through. "Shadowhawk, report." "I'm good," she gasped, crawling behind a crate. "We're compromised." She fired through the haze, hitting shapes she barely saw. Her instincts took over fast, precise, merciless. By the time the dust settled, only silence remained. But when she turned, Rook was down shrapnel through his chest. She dropped to his side, pressing her hands against the wound, blood hot and slick beneath her fingers. "Don't you die on me," she muttered. Rook's lips twisted into a faint smirk. "Told you. Not a legend, huh?" His hand went limp. Samantha sat there, staring at his still face, the flames reflecting off her eyes. The mountain wind howled through the compound like a lament. Another life lost to the same war that refused to end. When the extraction bird arrived hours later, she was the last aboard. She didn't look back this time. There was nothing left to see. As the helicopter lifted, the radio crackled again, General McAllister's voice. "Good work, Shadowhawk. The world will never know what happened tonight. But I will." She didn't answer. She just looked out at the desert, endless and empty, and thought of all the things she'd lost to get here. She had stepped into the sniper's role once to save lives. Now it was who she was, and it was costing her piece by piece. The flight back to the base was silent, except for the thrum of the helicopter blades slicing through the heavy night air. Samantha sat near the rear, her rifle resting across her knees, eyes fixed on the horizon. The desert below was fading into endless blackness, and for the first time since she'd become Shadowhawk, she didn't feel victorious, only hollow. Rook's blood still stained her gloves. His final smirk replayed in her mind on a loop, the way soldiers' last moments always did. But there was something else gnawing at her now, something colder. The mission had felt wrong. Too clean. Too deliberate. When the chopper touched down at the forward operating base, General McAllister was already waiting on the tarmac. His expression was unreadable, a man carved from the same steel as the machines he commanded. "Good work," he said flatly. The target was neutralized. Mission complete. Samantha's gaze was sharp. Was it? Because it didn't feel like recon. It felt like execution. McAllister studied her for a moment and gestured for her to follow. Inside the command tent, the air buzzed with low voices and the hum of monitors. He stopped before a large screen, showing live satellite footage, grainy images of the compound they had just destroyed. "This," he said, pointing, was a training hub for a rogue paramilitary group, funded off the books. Men responsible for the ambush that killed your predecessors in SEAL Team 6. She frowned. Then why wasn't it in our briefing? Because it wasn't our enemy, McAllister said quietly. It was ours. Samantha froze. What do you mean? He sighed, folding his arms. The men you took out were part of the Shadow Network private contractors gone off script. They were useful once, but they became a liability. You and your team cleaned up a mess that couldn't exist on record. The words hit her like a bullet. So you used us? McAllister didn't flinch. I used your talent. You wanted purpose, Parker? You found it. This is the real war, the one no one writes medals for. She stared at him, disgust rising in her throat. You sent Rook and the others to die just to erase a mistake. They knew the risks, he replied evenly. And so did you? Samantha turned away, her pulse roaring in her ears. For months she had fought to belong, to prove herself. And now she saw what that cost: loyalty, twisted into obedience, heroism turned into silence. That night, she sat alone in her quarters, staring at the rifle laid out on the cot. The metal gleamed faintly under the dim bulb. Her reflection looked back at her tired, scarred, and something else entirely. Changed. Rhodes found her there hours later, slipping quietly into the tent. They told me you were back, he said. And that Rook didn't make it. Samantha nodded, her voice hollow. They made sure no one would. He frowned, stepping closer. What happened out there? She hesitated, then told him everything: the mission, the truth, McAllister's admission. When she finished, Rhodes was silent, his jaw tight. They used you, he said finally. Turned your instincts into their weapon. She met his eyes. And I let them. He crouched down, his tone low but firm. You can still make it right. How? She asked. The report's classified. The mission's erased. The world doesn't even know it happened. Rhodes gave her a long look. Then maybe it's time they did. 2 days later, the base buzzed with quiet rumors. Shadowhawk was missing. No one knew where she'd gone, and no one dared ask. In reality, she wasn't far, just far enough to stay unseen. She'd taken the rifle, a data drive she'd stolen from McAllister's office, and a plan that scared even her. The drive held everything: mission logs, satellite feeds, classified orders, all proof of what had been buried. She moved through the night like a phantom, slipping past checkpoints until she reached the civilian side of the airfield. Her plan was simple: get to Kabul, find a journalist who still cared about truth, and hand over the drive. But simplicity never survived long in war. She was halfway down the access road when the headlights appeared behind her, 2 armored jeeps, speeding fast. McAllister's men. Samantha broke into a sprint, diving behind a wrecked supply truck as bullets tore through the air. She returned fire, each shot precise and deliberate, taking out one tire, then another. The jeep skidded, metal screaming against asphalt. But more soldiers poured out, shouting, fanning through the shadows. Pinned down, she ducked low, breathing hard. The sound of boots drew closer. She knew she couldn't hold them off forever. Then a voice cut through the chaos. Rhodes. Shadowhawk, move. She looked up to see him behind the wheel of an old transport truck, the door open. Without hesitation, she sprinted, diving inside as he slammed the pedal. Bullets sparked against the chassis as they roared off into the desert. When they were finally clear, he glanced at her, half smiling despite the madness. You always did pick the loud exits. She laughed once, breathless. You came back. Couldn't let you have all the fun, he said. Then his tone grew serious. You still got it, the proof? She nodded, patting the drive in her pocket. Enough to burn them all. They reached a safe house by dawn, an abandoned radio outpost tucked between cliffs. Samantha plugged the drive into a dusty laptop, her fingers flying across the keys. The files loaded documents, maps, orders signed by men in suits who'd never touched a battlefield. Rhodes stood behind her, reading in stunned silence. This could end careers. She shook her head. This could end lies. As she prepared the upload to a secure network, a shadow fell across the doorway. McAllister stepped in, gun drawn, his expression calm, almost regretful. "I should have known," he said softly. "You were never one to stay quiet." Samantha rose slowly, her own weapon leveled. "You taught me to follow instincts. Remember?" His eyes hardened. "You think the world will thank you for this? They'll call you a traitor. You'll destroy everything you fought to protect." She held his gaze. "No, I'll save what's left of it." A tense silence filled the air, the kind it could only end one way. McAllister's finger twitched. Samantha fired first. The shot echoed through the canyon, sharp and final. He dropped instantly, his pistol clattering to the floor. She lowered her rifle slowly, her chest heaving. For a long time, she just stood there, staring at the man who turned her into what she was. Then she pressed enter. The files began to upload. It took 3 minutes. 3 minutes that changed everything. By the next sunrise, the story broke across every major network. Leaked documents exposed secret military operations. The footage of her Valley firefight resurfaced this time, not as propaganda, but as proof. Samantha Parker became a name whispered across both sides of the world, hero to some, traitor to others. But for the first time, she didn't care. Weeks later, she vanished. No one knew where she went. Some said she fled overseas. Others swore she joined a private rescue network, operating in the gray between law and chaos. But those who'd fought beside her, the few still alive, knew the truth. She was still out there, watching from the shadows, rifle steady, eyes sharp. Not for vengeance, not for glory, but for justice. Because once, in a valley of fire, an ammo mule had picked up a sniper rifle and saved a team. Now, she carried that rifle to save the truth. And every time she looked through her scope, she remembered what Rhodes had told her. Heroes follow orders. Legends follow their hearts. That night, somewhere deep in the desert, a single shot echoed against the stars. And Shadowhawk disappeared into the silence once more.